Before the fame, before the stroke, and long before the headlines about feuds and conservatorship, Frank Fritz was just a guy with a deep love for rusty gold. Born in Davenport, Iowa in 1965, Frank was a small-town Midwestern kid who found joy in collecting the kinds of things most people would walk right past. Old toys, motorcycles, soda signs, oil cans, you name it. If it had a story or a speck of history behind it, Frank was probably already imagining how to clean it up and flip it for a profit. Long before TV ever came calling, Frank worked as a fire inspector, but the thrill of discovering antique treasures was always calling to him. So in the early 2000s, he quit his job and went full-time into picking, scouring barns, garages, junkyards, and swap meets across the heartland of America. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy, but it was what he loved. That passion is what eventually caught the attention of producers at the History Channel. They were looking to create a reality show about antique hunters, and Frank's buddy, Mike Wolfe, pitched the perfect idea. Mike and Frank had known each other for years, bonding over a shared obsession with Americana. The chemistry was undeniable. One was a smooth talker, the other more reserved but full of knowledge. It was the perfect balance. And just like that, American Pickers was born in 2010. Frank instantly became a fan favorite. While Mike often played the role of the enthusiastic negotiator, Frank brought a dose of skepticism and dry humor. He wasn't flashy, and he didn't sugarcoat things. But he was real. Audiences connected with that. They appreciated how Frank genuinely lit up when he found a rare oil can or a Harley-Davidson collectible. His eye for detail and knowledge of vintage motorcycle culture gave the show authenticity. It wasn't just TV magic. Frank really knew his stuff. Over the years, American Pickers exploded in popularity, becoming one of the History Channel's top-rated shows. Millions tune in every week to see what Mike and Frank would dig up next. Together, they traveled thousands of miles, meeting eccentric collectors and uncovering hidden gems in dusty barns and forgotten basements. For more than a decade, Frank was a constant presence on the show, always with his signature goatee, bandana, and a laugh that made you feel like you were part of the crew. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming. Frank struggled with back problems and took a leave of absence for surgery. Fans expected him to return, but he didn't. And the silence grew louder. Rumors swirled, and eventually, it became clear something was wrong. What began as a success story of two friends chasing their passion was now unraveling. In the next section, we'll dig into the real reason Frank disappeared from American Pickers and the first signs that things weren't as smooth as they seemed on screen. When season 21 of American Pickers rolled around in early 2020, longtime fans were confused. Something was off. Frank Fritz was missing. No formal announcement. No farewell episode. No tribute montage. Just gone. In his place, Mike Wolfe was seen picking solo or alongside new guest faces. At first, viewers thought it was temporary. Maybe Frank was out sick or just needed a break. After all, he mentioned back problems in earlier interviews. But as weeks turned into months, the silence became deafening. The History Channel didn't offer much clarity. Neither did Mike. For a show that built its reputation on transparency and authenticity, the sudden disappearance of a co-host who had been there from day one felt odd. Fans started speculating. Was it a contract dispute? Creative differences? Health issues? Rumors flew across social media, and every fan forum became a hub of theories. Then in July 2021, Frank finally broke his silence. In an interview with The Sun, he confirmed what many had suspected. He hadn't been fired outright, but he also hadn't been asked to return. According to Frank, he underwent major back surgery that required 185 stitches and 2 rods inserted into his spine. He took time off to recover, and during that period, he expected to come back. But that call from producers or Mike Wolfe never came. What stung even more was the emotional tone Frank took in the interview. He didn't mince words. He admitted that he and Mike hadn't spoken in over 2 years. Despite building the show together and sharing countless road trips, Frank claimed Mike never reached out. No calls, no texts, no visits while he was recovering. The man he once called a brother had seemingly cut him off completely. Frank also hinted at other behind-the-scenes tensions. He said he felt underappreciated by the network and suspected they favored Mike as the face of the show. It wasn't just about picking antiques anymore. It was about branding, image, and ratings. And Frank, with his grittier, less polished persona, didn't fit that mold anymore. This revelation sent shockwaves through the fanbase. Viewers who had watched for years suddenly felt like they'd missed something big. And in truth, they had. The on-screen chemistry between Mike and Frank had masked a deeper rift. What was once a show about two buddies chasing rusty treasures had become a quiet battlefield of egos, silence, and broken trust. Meanwhile, Frank was also open about his personal struggles. He admitted he had been to rehab for alcohol addiction and was trying to get his life back on track. He wanted to return to American Pickers, not just for the show, but because it gave him purpose. But the door had closed. In the next section, we'll explore how Mike Wolfe responded to Frank's public comments and why fans started choosing sides in the biggest fallout in antique TV history. When Frank Fritz finally aired his grievances publicly, it didn't take long for Mike Wolfe to respond, but his statement left fans feeling more uneasy than reassured. Mike took to Instagram in July 2021, not with a sit-down interview or an official statement from the History Channel, but with a short post that read more like a PR move than a heartfelt response. He said he wished Frank the best, called him a brother, and acknowledged the role Frank played in the show's success. But what stuck out to most fans wasn't what Mike said, it was what he didn't say. There was no explanation about why he hadn't contacted Frank during his recovery. No mention of whether Frank was ever invited back. And definitely no ownership of any wrongdoing. The vagueness of the post raised eyebrows. If these two were really as close as the show made them seem, why such a sterile response to someone who just opened up about being in physical and emotional pain? Fans didn't stay quiet. Comment sections across social media exploded. Viewers who had watched the duo for over a decade felt betrayed. Mike was seen as the more polished, media-savvy half of the team, while Frank was the down-to-earth, lovable curmudgeon. And in this scenario, many fans felt like Frank had been cast aside without dignity. Some accused Mike of going Hollywood, trading loyalty for brand image. Others criticized the History Channel for remaining silent and acting as if Frank never existed. The show tried to carry on, but something had clearly shifted. Viewer ratings began to dip, and longtime fans openly called for Frank's return. Hashtags like #BringBackFrank started trending. It wasn't just about losing a co-host. For many, it felt like the heart of American Pickers had been ripped out. Even more damaging were the stories that started surfacing from people who had met Mike and Frank on the road. While Frank was described as approachable and humorous, some viewers alleged Mike had a colder, more distant demeanor when the cameras were off. These anecdotes only fueled the narrative that Frank was the real soul of the show, while Mike was the corporate face who'd sold out. To make matters worse, new episodes featuring Mike and his brother Robbie Wolfe didn't quite hit the same. Robbie lacked Frank's quirky charm and comedic timing, and fans weren't shy about expressing their disappointment. The chemistry just wasn't there, and the show felt less like a fun road trip and more like a business transaction. Behind the scenes, producers hoped the drama would fade and that fans would eventually accept the new dynamic. But the divide kept growing. What started as a private fallout between two old friends had become a public reckoning for a beloved TV franchise. In the next section, we'll dive deeper into the personal battles Frank was fighting off camera and how they might have influenced the show's drastic shift. While the drama between Mike and Frank played out in the public eye, there was an even more serious battle happening behind the scenes, one that nearly cost Frank Fritz everything. Fans of American Pickers knew Frank as the wisecracking, no-nonsense half of the duo, but few realized the extent of his struggles with alcohol. It wasn't until after his departure from the show that the truth began to surface. Frank admitted in a rare interview that he had entered rehab for alcohol abuse. It wasn't his first time confronting the issue, but this time was different. After filming his final episodes of American Pickers, he hit a breaking point. His drinking had escalated, and he found himself spiraling. Alone, off the show, and feeling betrayed, Frank checked himself into a treatment center in Iowa. He stayed for 77 days, an unusually long stretch that hinted at how deep his battle really ran. In rehab, Frank worked hard to get sober. He participated in therapy, group counseling, and medical supervision. According to him, he came out a changed man. "I went to rehab and I've been sober now for 11 months, he told The Sun in a brutally honest interview. "I didn't like drinking anymore. My body couldn't take it, but sobriety was just the first step." Frank also faced serious health issues, including a major back surgery that left him unable to walk without assistance for months. He was in pain emotionally and physically, and on top of that, he was watching the show he helped build move on without him. Imagine waking up every day to see new episodes airing, knowing you were being replaced, not because you weren't good enough, but because you were struggling. It felt like a knife in the back. He didn't mince words when talking about the show's treatment of him. "They didn't contact me." Not once, he said about Mike and the producers. That's just how it is. The hurt was real, and fans could feel it in every word. What made things even more complicated was that Frank wasn't asking for sympathy. He took full responsibility for his addiction. But what he did expect, what many fans felt he deserved, was a second chance. After all, reality TV is filled with redemption arcs. Why couldn't Frank have one? Despite the pain, Frank pushed forward. He bought a house in Iowa and began slowly rebuilding his life. He surrounded himself with close friends, stayed away from toxic influences, and tried to stay connected to fans through occasional interviews and updates. He wasn't just recovering from addiction, he was recovering from public rejection. But as we'll explore in the next section, Frank's road to redemption was far from over. Just when things seemed to be looking up, a devastating medical emergency would strike, one that would change the trajectory of his life forever. Just when it seemed like Frank Fritz was finally reclaiming his life, tragedy struck. And this time, it wasn't something he could walk away from. In July 2022, shocking news broke that Frank had suffered a massive stroke. For fans who had been rooting for his comeback, it was like a punch to the gut. And for Frank, it was the beginning of yet another life-altering battle, this time for his very survival. The details were scarce at first. All that was confirmed was that Frank had been found on the floor of his Iowa home, unresponsive. A friend who hadn't heard from him in a while came by to check in, and that visit likely saved his life. Frank was rushed to the hospital, where doctors confirmed he'd had a stroke. It was severe enough that his ability to speak, walk, and care for himself was completely compromised. The news left fans stunned. After everything, getting sober, enduring public humiliation, working to rebuild his life, Frank was once again knocked down. And this time, he didn't have the strength to get back up on his own. The stroke left him in a debilitated state, unable to make medical or financial decisions. A court-appointed guardian had to step in to oversee his affairs. It was heartbreaking. Court documents later revealed the full extent of Frank's condition. He needed around-the-clock care and physical therapy. He had trouble communicating, and doctors were unsure how much cognitive function he'd recover. For a man who had once traveled across America hunting for hidden treasures and charming fans with every line, the contrast was gut-wrenching. To make matters worse, Frank's strained relationships became even more visible during this time. Where was Mike Wolfe during all this? That question echoed across social media, especially when Mike finally posted a cryptic message online saying he was praying for Frank. Many fans felt it was too little, too late. They wanted action, not platitudes. Some even accused Mike of using Frank's medical crisis as a PR opportunity to soften his image. Meanwhile, Frank's close friends and a few loyal family members stepped in to manage his care. A conservatorship was put in place to handle his medical decisions and daily needs. The financial burden was steep. Frank needed a full-time caregiver, home modifications, and intensive therapy. It wasn't just a personal crisis, it was a logistical and financial nightmare. Yet despite the bleak circumstances, a sliver of hope remained. Reports indicated that Frank was showing small signs of improvement, regaining limited mobility, and slowly working on speech recovery. But the road ahead was long and uncertain. Would he ever walk again? Would he be able to speak clearly or recognize familiar faces? Fans held their breath, waiting for updates. But what nobody knew at the time was that the stroke would have far-reaching consequences, not just for Frank's health, but for his legacy, his finances, and his place in the American Pickers story. In the next section, we'll explore the shocking turn his conservatorship took and the family feud brewing beneath the surface. While the public focused on Frank Fritz's health and hoped for his recovery, something much darker was playing out behind closed doors, something that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with money, power, and trust. As Frank lay in recovery after his stroke, unable to speak for himself, the fight over his estate and decision-making power began, and it got ugly fast. Almost immediately after the stroke, the court appointed a longtime friend of Frank's as his temporary guardian. Another party was placed in charge of his finances as a conservator. At first glance, this arrangement seemed like a responsible move, something done purely out of necessity. But as time went on, cracks began to appear in the foundation of that trust. Whispers started circulating that some people close to Frank weren't acting purely out of goodwill. Concerns were raised about how his money was being managed. Court documents reveal that Frank's estate was valued at several $100,000, and that included the home he nearly died in, his vintage motorcycle collection, and whatever residual earnings he still received from American pickers. It wasn't an astronomical fortune, but it was enough to spark suspicion. Some family members reportedly questioned whether Frank's assets were truly being used for his care, or if someone was quietly helping themselves while Frank remained incapacitated. Requests for financial transparency began rolling in. The court demanded receipts, accountability, and proof that every penny was going toward Frank's recovery. But the responses weren't always satisfactory, and that raised more red flags. On top of that, tensions between family members and the appointed guardian started to rise. Some accused the guardian of isolating Frank from loved ones. Visits became restricted. Communication was filtered. Those who had been close to Frank for decades suddenly felt like outsiders, locked out of his life when he needed them most. One particularly bitter feud developed between a cousin and the guardian. The cousin claimed that Frank wouldn't have wanted this setup, that he would have preferred to have family manage his affairs. But with Frank unable to express his own wishes, the court sided with the status quo for now. The entire situation became a legal and emotional minefield. And for fans who remembered Frank as a jovial, rough-around-the-edges picker who just wanted to find cool stuff and tell good stories, it was painful to watch. The guy who once made us laugh on screen was now the center of a heartbreaking courtroom drama he couldn't even participate in. Even as Frank slowly made progress in physical therapy, he remained trapped in a legal web spawned by people claiming to have his best interests at heart. But who could truly be trusted? Were these caretakers angels in disguise, or opportunists capitalizing on a man's downfall? As this conservatorship drama brewed, fans began wondering, what about Mike Wolfe? Could he step in? Would he try to reconcile? Or had he washed his hands of Frank completely? For months after Frank Fritz's stroke, one question lingered in the minds of American pickers fans everywhere. Where was Mike Wolfe? Once thick as thieves on screen and inseparable on the picking road, the two had shared laughs, arguments, and an undeniable chemistry that helped build American pickers into one of History Channel's most beloved shows. But when Frank disappeared from the series in 2020 due to back surgery, things quickly soured between the former friends. Behind-the-scenes disputes, clashing egos, and brewing resentment led to a highly publicized split. Frank made no secret of his feelings. He publicly accused Mike of abandoning him during his health struggles, and even alleged that Mike hadn't reached out to him for over 2 years. According to Frank, their friendship had become nothing more than TV fiction. But then came the stroke in July 2022, a life-altering event that seemed to shake the foundation of everything. Fans waited to hear from Mike. Would he break his silence? Would he visit Frank in the hospital? For a time, nothing happened. Just deafening silence. The lack of public support had people raising eyebrows and pointing fingers. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, Mike posted a heartfelt message on Instagram. "I have been very private in the past year in regards to Frank's life and the journey he's been on," Mike wrote. "There has been lots of opinions in regards to mine and Frank's friendship and the show, but now is not the time to set the record straight. Now is the time to pray for my friend." He followed it with photos of their early picking days, tagging it with hashtag #PrayForFrank and encouraging fans to send positive thoughts. Some followers welcomed the message, grateful that Mike had finally acknowledged his former partner. Others called it too little, too late. Was this a genuine gesture of support, or a PR move to protect his own image? Behind the scenes, rumors swirled. Some insiders claimed that Mike had reached out to Frank's family, offering financial help or to assist in arranging care. But there were no confirmed reports of him actually visiting Frank in person. No photo ops. No bedside reunions. Just silence again. It left fans torn. Could Mike really be grieving the loss of their friendship from afar, regretting how things ended? Or was he simply maintaining a safe emotional distance from a situation he no longer wanted part of? The truth remained hazy. Frank's conservators never mentioned Mike's involvement in any legal or medical decisions. No donations, no statements about long-term support. If Mike did help, he kept it incredibly quiet. Yet despite the murky waters between them, some fans held out hope that Frank's condition might spark a real reunion, or at least some closure. After all, if a near-death experience didn't bring old friends back together, what could? Frank Fritz was once the beating heart of American pickers. With his raspy voice, quick wit, and eye for the bizarre, he filled the screen with energy. Fans knew him as the funny, no-nonsense foil to Mike Wolfe's smooth-talking charm. But after his stroke in July 2022, the man who never stopped talking was suddenly silent. The stroke hit hard, both literally and symbolically. According to court documents, Frank was found on the floor of his Iowa home unresponsive. He was rushed to the hospital, and the prognosis was grim. Neurological damage, cognitive impairment, and most notably, an inability to communicate the way he once did. Friends and family were left reeling. "He's not the Frank we knew," said one close source to local news. "He's in there, but it's like the lights have dimmed." Communication, which had been one of Frank's greatest strengths, was now one of his biggest challenges. Reports indicate he struggled with speech, memory, and understanding conversations. Simple sentences took immense effort. The sharp banter that once defined his TV persona was gone. In its place was a man grappling with confusion and frustration. The reality was clear. Frank needed 24/7 care. His conservatorship papers described him as incapable of making financial or personal decisions. Nurses and aides managed his medications, hygiene, and therapy. Family members, once on the sidelines, were now fully in charge of his life. And that loss of independence, it devastated him. Frank had always been fiercely self-reliant. Even after his exit from American Pickers, he tried to rebuild his life on his own terms. He opened an antique store in Illinois and remained a recognizable face among collectors and fans. But now everything had changed. Every decision, from what he ate to when he slept, was made for him. Though no direct video or audio updates from Frank have been made public, those close to him hint at occasional glimpses of the old Frank. A smile here, a frustrated grunt when he hears a familiar voice. Sometimes, even a weak thumbs up. These tiny moments carry enormous weight for loved ones, who cling to the hope that recovery, no matter how slow, is still possible. But perhaps the cruelest twist is that the man who once charmed millions with his personality now struggles to even recognize some of his closest friends. For fans, it's like watching a beloved character trapped in a shell, present but unreachable. It's a sobering reminder that fame and fortune can't shield anyone from the fragility of life. Frank's journey from pick-and legend to silent survivor is one that has left fans heartbroken, and perhaps even Mike Wolfe haunted by the unfinished chapters between them. When Frank Fritz vanished from American Pickers, the ripple effect was immediate and brutal. Ratings dipped. Fan complaints flooded social media. And suddenly, the chemistry that had made the show irresistible felt off. Something, or rather someone, was missing. The soul of the show had been fractured, and the cracks were showing. History Channel tried to push forward. Mike Wolfe took on a larger role, stepping further into the spotlight. He brought in his brother Robbie Wolfe as a new co-host, and longtime sidekick Danielle Colby remained part of the team. But viewers weren't buying it. They didn't just watch American Pickers for the antiques. They watched it for the banter, the odd couple charm, and the unpredictable antics between Mike and Frank. Replacing that dynamic proved almost impossible. Online forums lit up with frustrated fans demanding answers. "Bring Frank back" became a rallying cry. Many viewers argued that without Frank's unique personality and sharp instincts, the show had lost its authenticity. While Robbie brought a calm, polite energy, it lacked the friction that had made the original duo so entertaining. Mike's smooth talking now felt hollow, almost like a monologue missing its punchline. Danielle Colby, who had always served as the show's anchor from their base in LeClaire, Iowa, also acknowledged in interviews that things weren't the same. Although she remained diplomatic, fans could sense the tension. Internally, the show was evolving, but not in a way that resonated with its core audience. The ratings slump confirmed it. Viewership dropped steadily following Frank's departure. Even new storylines and fresh locations couldn't recapture the magic. The pickings were still good, but the pickers? Not so much. Episodes that once averaged 3 to 4 million viewers now struggled to hit those highs. It was clear that American Pickers wasn't just about rusty treasures, it was about people, and Frank was a crucial piece of that puzzle. Even the way Mike addressed Frank's absence stirred controversy. In public statements, Mike expressed concern and support, but fans read between the lines. Some felt his tributes were too late, too scripted. And after years of partnership, the emotional disconnect was jarring. "If you really cared, why didn't you fight to keep him on the show?" one fan asked on Instagram. Behind the scenes, producers scrambled to rebrand. New merchandise, fresh graphics, even high-profile guest pickers were introduced. But none of it stuck. No one could recreate the simple magic of Frank and Mike arguing over gas station signs and vintage bikes. That organic, brotherly bickering had been lightning in a bottle, and it was gone. In the end, American pickers may continue to air, but the nostalgia feels forced, and the story's less heartfelt. It's like watching a cover band playing the greatest hits, but missing the spark that made them legendary. As fans waited, hoping for a warm reunion or at least a peaceful closure between Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz, what came instead was silence and subtle jabs. After decades of friendship, hundreds of road trips, and more than 300 episodes filmed side by side, it seemed impossible that the bond between Mike and Frank could dissolve so completely. Yet, the deeper you dig into the timeline, the more evident it becomes. This wasn't just a professional falling out. This was personal. Deeply personal. The first real fracture came from Frank's public remarks in 2021. He claimed that he hadn't spoken to Mike in 2 years, even though Mike was telling fans how much he wished Frank the best. That bombshell interview with the Sun shook fans. Frank said plainly, "Mike didn't call me once, not once." For someone who'd shared motels, meals, and memories on the road with Frank for nearly a decade, that silence was deafening. According to Frank, he had been essentially ghosted. No support during his back surgery recovery, no visits, no check-ins during his personal health struggles. It wasn't just disappointing, it was heartbreaking. To Frank, the man he considered a friend for over 40 years had abandoned him when he needed him most. Meanwhile, Mike tried to stay above the fray publicly. He posted on Instagram expressing hope for Frank's recovery and shared nostalgic photos of the two of them picking together. But those posts didn't sit well with fans who were now hearing Frank's side of the story. They wanted more than just a PR statement. They wanted accountability. And Frank wasn't shy about calling it out. "He's doing it for the camera," he said. He doesn't really care. Even more damning were the rumors about Frank's exit being more about internal politics than recovery time. Some sources claimed that Mike had been ready to move on without him, eager to bring in his brother Robbie and take greater creative control. Frank saw that as a betrayal. He wasn't just being replaced, he was being erased from the very show he helped build. As if things weren't messy enough, Frank's stroke in 2022 further widened the chasm. Though Mike publicly wished him well, Frank's friends and caretakers suggested there still hadn't been any personal reconciliation. Mike hadn't visited, hadn't reached out directly, and wasn't involved in Frank's rehabilitation or recovery. The silence continued. Fans, clinging to hope, speculated about a surprise comeback or a reunion special. But insiders say the relationship may be permanently fractured. There's simply too much pain, too much pride, and too many years of unresolved tension. Both men have moved on in different ways. In the end, the story of Mike and Frank isn't just about rusted signs, rare finds, or a hit TV show. It's a cautionary tale about friendship, ego, and what happens when fame pulls people in opposite directions. The real treasure wasn't what they found in barns, it was what they had in each other. And tragically, that's something even the most seasoned pickers couldn't save. Frank Fritz wasn't just a co-host. He wasn't just the guy in the back of the van cracking jokes and arguing about oil cans. He was the soul of American pickers, the grounding force that made the show feel real. To millions of fans, Frank represented the heart of small-town America. He wasn't polished, he wasn't perfect, but he was genuine. That was his magic. As the years rolled on after his departure from the show, fans held on to hope that one day Mike and Frank might sit down, hash it out, and maybe, just maybe, hit the road together one more time. But that moment never came. Frank Fritz eventually passed away, leaving behind more than just a legacy of antiques and old signs. He left behind memories that can't be replaced. The laughter, the bickering, the excitement in his eyes when he found a vintage oil can or rusty motorcycle part. Those moments are frozen in time, etched into the history of the show and the hearts of the viewers who welcomed him into their homes every week. His passing was felt like a gut punch, not just for fans, but for those who knew the depth of his struggle. From health battles to public heartbreak, Frank's journey was never easy, but he faced it all with a rugged honesty that made him unforgettable. Mike Wolfe eventually shared a touching tribute, acknowledging their complicated friendship and the impact Frank had on his life. It was bittersweet, words that should have come earlier, maybe when they still had time to heal. But life doesn't always wait for closure. In the end, Frank Fritz's greatest treasure wasn't buried in a barn or tucked behind a pile of junk. It was in the joy he sparked in millions of people across the country. It was in the moments of laughter, the brotherhood on screen, and the unfiltered spirit he brought to every pick. He may be gone now, but his memory lives on every time someone spots an old sign and thinks, Frank would have loved that. Rest in peace, Frank. You were one of a kind.